The Syrian civil war produced the worst humanitarian catastrophe of the 21st century, 500,000 dead, 13 million displaced. Cities systematically destroyed. In the middle of that catastrophe, the CIA ran a $1 billion per year covert arms program, whose weapon distribution it could not fully control, and whose beneficiaries it could not fully vet. Operation Timber Sycamore was not Syria's cause. The question this episode examines honestly: did it make the catastrophe worse or merely longer? The documentary record now allows us to look at the evidence. The Syrian civil war began in March 2011, part of the Arab Spring uprisings that swept the Middle East. Assad's government responded to initially peaceful protests with lethal force. By mid-2011, armed resistance had emerged. By 2012, it had fractured into dozens of competing factions, ranging from secular nationalist to Islamist to jihadist. The Obama administration, concluding that Assad must go, began exploring covert support for rebel groups in 2012. The specific challenge identified from the beginning: the rebellion was not a coherent force. It was a coalition of competing groups with different objectives, different ideologies, and different foreign backers. Arming a fractured coalition is not the same as arming an army. Operation Timber Sycamore operated through a specific architecture designed to maintain plausible deniability. The CIA coordinated with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, who provided financing and logistical infrastructure. Jordan served as the primary training and transit hub. The Military Operations Center in Amman, a joint CIA-allied intelligence facility, managed weapon supply to vetted rebel groups. The weapons, primarily small arms, anti-tank missiles including tow missiles, and ammunition. The vetting process was designed to prevent weapons reaching jihadist groups. The vetting process was applied to groups at the point of supply. It was not applied to what happened to weapons after they reached those groups. The TOW anti-tank missile became the program's most visible signature and its most tracked weapon. TOW missiles are American-manufactured, serialized, and trackable. Multiple journalistic and research investigations documented specific TOW missiles from Timber Sycamore appearing in the hands of RR al-Sham, a group with documented connections to jihadist networks that the program specifically excluded from direct supply. The specific mechanism: weapons transferred to vetted groups were subsequently traded, sold, or transferred to non-vetted groups in the field. Battlefield economics, not ideological affinity, drove most of the secondary transfers. A fighter who needs money sells a missile to someone who has money. The missile does not retain its vetting status. The claim that Timber Sycamore armed ISIS, or groups that became ISIS, requires specific and careful examination because it is simultaneously partially true, frequently overstated, and consequential enough that the evidence must be presented precisely. ISIS's primary arms supply came from Iraqi military stocks seized when Iraqi forces collapsed in Mosul in June 2014. American-supplied weapons that fell to ISIS through Iraqi military failure, not through the CIA's Syria program. The specific documented connection is different. Weapons from Timber Sycamore reached groups that had tactical cooperation with, transferred personnel to, or later merged with ISIS affiliates. The distinction matters for accountability. The consequences were real regardless of the mechanism. The specific documented Timber Sycamore to ISIS connection runs through Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate, and through the specific phenomenon of factional defection. As the moderate rebel coalition fractured under military pressure in 2013 and 2014, significant numbers of fighters defected from vetted groups to more effective fighting forces, including Nusra. They took their weapons. The CIA's own internal assessments, portions of which have been shared with congressional oversight committees and referenced in published accounts, acknowledged that weapon diversion was occurring and that the program lacked sufficient end-use monitoring to prevent it. The program knew. The $1 billion continued. The program's human dimension is the element most consistently absent from the intelligence analysis of Timber Sycamore. The Syrians who received CIA training and weapons were not abstracted recipients of a covert program. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, and students who had picked up weapons because their government was killing their families and their communities. They were fighting for something real. Many of them were killed. Many of the groups that received training were destroyed by Assad's forces, by Russian airstrikes, by ISIS, or by each other. The CIA's covert program operated in an environment of genuine human desperation, and the gap between what the program could provide and what the people receiving it actually needed is the specific human failure the episode must acknowledge. The specific human cost of the program's failure is most visible in the groups the CIA explicitly supported that were subsequently destroyed. The Syria Revolutionary Front, a coalition of vetted Western-backed rebel groups, was effectively dismantled by ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra in late 2014. Its fighters were killed or forced to defect. The weapons it had received were captured. The communities it had been defending were left without protection. The CIA's response: accelerate the program. More training, more weapons, to new groups. The pattern of arming, losing the armed group, and rearming replacement groups repeated multiple times across the program's 5-year run. Each repetition distributed more weapons into an environment of declining accountability. President Trump terminated Operation Timber Sycamore in July 2017, following a Washington Post report revealing the program's existence and scale. The termination was announced without detailed public justification. The CIA did not publicly comment. The official reason given privately to allies: the program had not achieved its objectives and was being replaced by other approaches. The specific assessment behind the termination was not made public. What is documented: by 2017, the moderate Syrian rebel coalition the program was designed to support had been largely destroyed. Assad, supported by Russian military intervention from September 2015, had regained significant territory. The program's stated objective, weakening Assad sufficiently to force a negotiated transition, had not been achieved. Since Timber Sycamore distributed did not disappear when the program ended. The specific post-termination accountability problem: an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 individuals had received some training or equipment through the program and its associated networks. The weapons, small arms, anti-tank missiles, ammunition, remained in Syria's conflict environment. Some were used against Assad's forces after the program ended. Some were captured. Some were transferred. The program's termination ended the CIA's involvement. It did not end the weapons' involvement. A covert arms program's legacy is not measured by its duration. It is measured by the lifespan of the weapons it distributed. The specific precedent that Timber Sycamore most directly parallels, and most conspicuously failed to fully apply, is the CIA's covert arming of Afghan mujahideen against the Soviet occupation from 1979 to 1989. Operation Cyclone supplied Stinger missiles, weapons, and training to Afghan fighters, who successfully drove the Soviet military from Afghanistan. The weapons distributed through Cyclone remained in Afghanistan and the region for decades. Some reached groups that became al-Qaeda affiliates. The Taliban inherited significant portions of the arms supply network. The specific lesson, that weapons distributed through covert programs remain in the operational environment long after the program's objectives are achieved or abandoned, was available to Timber Sycamore's architects in documented form. It was not fully applied. The Afghanistan comparison extends to the most consequential element: what happens to the country and its people after a covert program ends. Afghanistan after Soviet withdrawal was left with a fractured rebel coalition, an abundance of weapons, no legitimate government, and CIA disengagement. The result: civil war, Taliban emergence, al-Qaeda hosting. September 11th, Syria, after Timber Sycamore's termination, had a fractured opposition, abundant weapons, no legitimate political process, and continued Assad rule supported by Russia and Iran. The political trajectory in 2025, following Assad's fall in December 2024, involves a transition government whose composition and stability remains genuinely uncertain. The covert program's relationship to that outcome is complex, partial, and consequential. What it is not, irrelevant. The accountability question that Timber Sycamore most clearly raises is institutional rather than individual. At what point does a covert program's documented failure to achieve its objectives, combined with documented evidence of harmful secondary consequences, require a different decision from the institution running it? The program ran for approximately 5 years at approximately $1 billion per year. Its primary objective, weakening Assad to force negotiated transition, was not achieved. Its documented secondary consequences, weapon diversion, strengthening of jihadist-adjacent factions, were known internally. The program continued until a presidential decision ended it. The congressional oversight committees that reviewed it did not end it. The institutional inertia that kept it running is the specific subject of the accountability question. The specific lesson Timber Sycamore adds to the Series D canon is the one that distinguishes covert action from covert intelligence. Operations designed to change a situation on the ground, rather than simply understand it, carry consequences that intelligence collection does not. A spy who reports on an enemy's ground, rather than simply understand it, carry consequences that intelligence collection does not. A spy who reports on an enemy's plans does not change the situation by reporting. A covert arms program changes the situation by arming. And the armed parties make decisions about those arms that the arming party cannot fully control. The distinction between intelligence collection and covert action is the distinction between observing a system and intervening in one. Every intervention produces consequences the intervention cannot fully anticipate. Timber Sycamore is the most recent large-scale demonstration of that principle. Operation Timber Sycamore's place in the Series D canon is specific. It is the most recent large-scale covert action program whose outcomes are partially visible in the documentary record, whose consequences are still active in 2025 and 2026, and whose accountability question has not been resolved by any public process. It joins Ajax, Anthropoid, Wrath of God, Ryan, and the Cambridge Five in demonstrating the same recurring pattern. Covert operations produce consequences that exceed their anticipated scope in directions their architects did not fully predict, over timeframes that outlast the operations themselves. The pattern is documented across 7 decades of Western intelligence history. The institutional learning from that pattern remains incomplete. $1 billion a year, 5 years, a fractured Syrian opposition, weapons that outlasted the program by years, an objective not achieved, a humanitarian catastrophe that the program neither caused nor resolved. And the specific institutional question, when does documented failure, combined with documented harmful secondary consequences, require a different decision? Timber Sycamore does not have a clean answer. No operation in this series does. That is the honest conclusion this series has reached across 6 episodes and 7 decades of documented covert history. Series D concludes next episode with Unit 8200, Israel's military intelligence signals unit that produced Stuxnet, the most sophisticated cyberweapon ever deployed. And that represents the specific future of covert operations. Code rather than weapons, networks rather than agents, effects that can be precisely targeted and, as Stuxnet demonstrated, cannot always be contained to their intended targets. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. The operations are documented. The pattern continues. And the next operation being planned today will produce consequences that nobody in the room is fully anticipating.